Hi, I'm Michael Killen. Every state in the United States is trying to grow its economy and increase jobs. However, there is only one state in the entire United States that is taking a bold move to transform their economy and create jobs by at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that is the great state of California. On this program, we are going to discuss some of the things that California is doing to build its economy and create jobs and reduce emissions. And I've invited Marianna Grossman. She is the head of Sustainable Silicon Valley to be on this program. I'm going to ask her a series of questions about what Silicon Valley is going to do to seize the next gold rush and what her organization is doing to help. Marianna, how are you?
Great. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Marianna, I'd just like to step back for a second. What do you think about this thing called greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and climate warming? Is it the threat, some people say, or is it just some guise of the government to control us or some other reason? Tell us what you think.
Well, I'm afraid the story is worse than most people think. That we have been growing the use of fossil fuels at an exponential rate since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And as you burn fossil fuels, you create carbon dioxide and other emissions. And it ends up creating kind of a blanket around the Earth. And the result of that is a lot of heat that gets absorbed by the ocean, and it creates much more severe weather, different precipitation patterns, severe storms like we had the wind today, kind of unusual wind. And the more you have of that, the more disruption there is to things like pollination cycles and agriculture, and you start to have increasing food prices around the world and political instability as a result of that. So I think that it's a serious long-term problem, but it's also serious right now.
So if Oklahoma is already a dust bowl, it could be even more of a dust bowl in the future if the planet keeps increasing, right?
It could. And it could also see floods from unexpected floods when snow melts quickly and the levels rise. So you see both drought and floods where you didn't expect them before.
So Texas has a great shoreline. We can see a lot of that, or parts of that shoreline being washed away, destroying real estate value and structures and people's jobs.
And you can see that here in California as sea level rises, that the intakes for the water systems end up getting salt water coming into them, and it affects our freshwater supplies and farming and a lot of other things as well. So there are effects right here at home as well as elsewhere around the country and around the world.
Okay, I guess it was in 1849 we had the Great Gold Rush. California's geography, its land, created an opportunity for thousands of people that come from all over the world, and many of them got rich. And then I guess in the 50s or 60s, the Silicon Valley gold rush began, right? And many people were able to work, create great amount of wealth. And now we seem to be at a time in history when the state of California has decided it's time to try to create a new gold rush, a new Silicon Valley gold rush. And that's by attacking the growth of greenhouse gas emissions. And so you're centered right here in Silicon Valley, and you have an organization called Sustainable Silicon Valley. And let me just ask, what role do you think Silicon Valley or the great state of California is going to play in transforming itself and at the same time decreasing greenhouse gases? That's a lot.
That's a great question and a great framing. The reason that California is a bed of innovation and trend setting and creativity from LA to San Francisco and from the great redwoods forests down to the deserts, is because we've attracted innovators and people who are risk takers, and they've left home from all over the world or all over the United States, come out here to try something new, to reinvent themselves. So we are a state built on a culture of reinvention. And I think that's right, from the 1849 to the current day. I was privileged to be involved with some of the dot-com revolution activities that were going on, and I was starting to talk to people about sustainability then. And what I learned was really interesting, that the reason that Silicon Valley became such a cradle of innovation from the 50s forward is because there was a very unique collaboration between the government, the universities, and business to be able to make investments in science and also to translate that scientific innovation and idea generation into products. And then initially with semiconductors, the government was a main customer for those products, so they created a market for those products. One of the roles of government now with renewable energy is to help create a market for those kinds of energy that compete with fossil fuels, which are already subsidized heavily by the government. So there's continuing to be this interplay between industry, the university, and government, and also a whole network of people like venture capitalists and other kind of people, lawyers, other people who know how to put together new businesses and to try new things. And there's a flow of people who've done startups, who are now, maybe several startups, brought companies up to success, and they're concerned about climate change, and they're concerned about the future, and they're putting their ingenuity into the clean tech revolution.
You said a lot of things, and I just want to, I'll ask a question, but I just want to add this. Like you, I've traveled and came from a different part of the United States, and I can reflect on different parts of the states, and there are some very brilliant, great innovators all over the country.
Absolutely.
Okay. Here, we might have an environment that's different than other parts, and it seems to me in other parts of the country, there are people who are concerned with climate change, climate warming, etc., but they don't seem to see it as a business opportunity. And what do you think about that?
Well, one thing I just want to correct. I'm a native Californian. I was born in San Francisco. Although I have lived elsewhere in the U.S., and I have traveled elsewhere as well. I just want to put that on the record. What I think is there are a couple things that are different. In Silicon Valley in particular, there's a and California in general, there's a high tolerance of failure. You can fail and get back up and try again. And as long as you don't fail every single time, you have a few successes in there, people will trust you, and you can start over. In other places, there tends to be less acceptance of that and more ostracism of people who aren't successful. So there's less innovation if there's less risk-taking. So we have a culture that encourages risk-taking here in California, especially in Silicon Valley. So there's a difference there. There's certainly innovation on clean technology happening all over the country. And in fact, there are companies like Germany that are leaders in solar, and there are places in wind technology in Denmark. So, and certainly in China, there's a lot of investment in renewable energy and clean technology solutions. So we need to not delude ourselves that we are the only place where that is happening. But there is a lot of creativity happening here, and there's a lot of attention on that opportunity.
Okay, I agree. A lot of attention. And now I would like to jump to your organization, Sustainable Silicon Valley. And first, could you give us a definition of sustainable or sustainability? What do you mean? And what do you include under it?
The classic definition of sustainability that I've heard over the years is having an economy or a way that we live and use resources today that leaves something that's going to be functioning well for future generations. So that we're not sort of hogging all the resources and leaving a big pile of garbage for our heirs. And that's basically the bottom line of sustainability. There are examples of systems in nature that are sustainable, ecosystems that persist over thousands and thousands of years. There aren't so many examples of human civilizations that are sustainable, but in natural systems there are. And that means all the resources get recycled, and the knowledge gets recycled and passed on in an effective way, and you have something called dynamic equilibrium, which is different than the exponential growth model that our economy is based on.
And now you brought up exponential growth, including the word growth. And you're questioning whether or not, as a civilization or as a country, we're going to continue the same way we got ourselves out of a lot of trouble is we'll always sell our way out, we'll always grow. And you think we're going to continue exponential growth or some other rate of growth?
Well, I think they're limit. We're on a planet that it is surrounded by essentially empty space for our purposes, right? So there's nowhere to grow beyond the resources that are on the planet for fresh water, for materials, for the clean air, all the living soil, biodiversity, all those kinds of things that make up the web of life that we depend on. So if we unravel the web of life to feed our own demands now, then we imperil the future generations' ability to have agriculture and to have an economy that sustains itself.
Okay, you gave us a little view of the Earth as something finite, surrounded by space. We really can't leave here, and this is what we have to work with. When in your life did you have that epiphany that there is a limit to this Earth and all its resources? When did you have that epiphany?
Well, I was fortunate to be able to study with the authors of a book called The Limits to Growth, and I was in college back in the late 70s. So that's when I learned about that model of a finite planet and what happens when you have exponential growth in a finite system. And you basically run into something called overshoot and collapse. So if you look at the fisheries, if you fish all the fish before they have a chance to reach maturity, then you end up having smaller fish stocks.
So since you head an organization that has the names Sustainable Silicon Valley, and I've now learned that sustainable means to continue, maintain, and to make sure you do this in such a way you don't leave nothing or a mess for those that come after us. Would that be good?
That's actually right. And what you can have exponential growth of knowledge, of love, of culture, of creativity, of art, those kinds of things you can grow infinitely. You can substitute know-how for material things. And there's a lot of examples of that. It's called dematerialization. So you can go from copper wire to fiber optic to satellite, and you can still have more and more communication. But there's a limit to how much energy you can use if you're not using the solar energy that's coming into the planet.
So some things are unlimited. We can keep love, art,
intelligence,
information, whatever, and other things. But then there's other things that are just finite. I would like to ask, in terms of the area that your organization is concerned with, it's energy, and is energy things that are derived from oil, coal, gas, the sun, and is it anything else in your mix of resources that your group is concerned with helping the valley, Silicon Valley, or the world sustain?
Well, we were formed in the year 2000 as a consortium of businesses and governmental agencies and environmental advocates saying, why don't we stop butting heads and all work together to have a more sustainable region? And we did a research and prioritized the top environmental issues of concern, with the energy being the most important one. And then by the time we incorporated, there was a lot of work going on to lay the groundwork for AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act that you alluded to at the beginning of this conversation. So we started working on helping companies understand their energy footprint and reduce it. And then I've been the executive director for 2 years now. So when I started, that was with the organization, that was what we were focusing on, energy. And then my board asked me to add water as a next topic of concern. Water and energy are highly interrelated, and water and climate change are interrelated. So the three things work together to mean that water is going to be a very constrained resource. And while we can still get energy from things like wind and solar, the water resources are more limited and constrained. And that's going to be the source of real problems in the future.
So your organization focuses on energy as well as water. Okay. And I'm with you there.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, you have members in your organization.
Yes, we do.
Could you break them down maybe into just two groups of organizations or three so that I can get a real feel for?
Yes. So we have members in the business community, including big companies like Intel and HP and SAP and IBM, and not just technology companies, also Genentech, a biotech company, and Electronic Arts. We have a big range of eBay, a bunch of big companies, and then medium-sized and smaller companies, a few defense companies as well. On the government side, we have federal agencies like NASA, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District on the regional basis, and then lots of counties and local governmental agencies, the Valley Transportation Authority on the government side. Universities, we're working a lot with Stanford, San Jose State University, and Santa Clara University are partners, as well as Foothill de Anza College and Palo Alto School District, and we haven't reached out to other school districts yet.
Okay.
But so we have the academic and then nonprofit environmental groups as well.
So it is corporations, small and some big ones, and I think SAP, IBM, HP, and you mentioned Intel, okay? And then it's a whole group of different types of governments, and I heard regional, I heard local, and I've even heard some federal, like the NASA, okay, so that's the other group. And then it's the academics, the colleges, the Stanfords, the San Jose State, and others. So it's three different groups. And what do you do with them? How do you help them?
We do a number of things. We started out having all our partners measure their energy footprint and report to us on a regional basis how they were doing on reducing their CO2 emissions, something you also talked about earlier in the show. And we also did a lot of informational kinds of education. Here's what sustainability is. Here are tools that you can use and that sort of thing. That was our early days. At a certain point, people sort of knew that sustainability was important, and they really wanted to know, well, what do I do systematically to help my community with a climate action plan, or my institution, my university, or my business implement operational measures for sustainability, which means reducing energy and other resource use and water, or it also means growing the business opportunity that you also alluded to earlier, creating green businesses where your solution helps empower your customers to be more green or more sustainable. So we work with them to help them understand roadmaps for doing that, and also we have a community of leaders within these organizations helping each other create solutions. And I'll have a few examples I could share with you of those.
All right, before you give me examples, okay, I see those three different groups, and I hear education and maybe cooperation amongst and reporting, but how do you actually get them to work together, or do you have seminars, do you have meetings, workshops, do you make things, what do you do?
Well, we do all those things. We have an annual conference. The one we just held at Stanford last year was in December, was called the Water Energy Smart Technology Summit, or the WEST Summit. We had panels talking about different aspects of energy and water together. And people like the regional administrator of the Small Businesses Administration for the United States government, and California Forward, and also businesses like SAP and IBM presented, and venture capitalists. We had a wide range of people involved in those conversations. We also have an example of a project where there was collaboration to actually solve a problem and to do a pilot. Santa Clara University came to us and said, we want to implement a smart microgrid on our campus. We said, okay, that's interesting. In order to do that, you have to work with Silicon Valley Power, which is the city of Santa Clara's utility, and you have to work with vendors like Cisco and Valence Energy, which is now part of Sirius Energy or Sirius Materials, and a bunch of other companies that have all the solutions that you need to weave together in order to allow the university to manage its energy independently of the grid if they want to, generating their own power with solar and other sources of power, and be able to manage their energy supply and demand with intelligent solutions.
Now, when Santa Clara University wanted to do this, they came to you folks?
Yes.
And you folks helped them see the big picture and maybe meet the parties in these different organizations? What did you folks?
They had an energy plan. They had worked all on this. They knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't know how to connect with the corporate partners. So we went out to all the people like Echelon and Cisco and Brocade and Colomb and all these different companies And we brought them together in a series of meetings. And then we had a conference on smart microgrid. So the solution sets for how do you go about doing this on a building level and then connecting the buildings together became clear to them. And then they could look at all these different vendors and figure out how are they going to weave their own solution set together. And then we also work with them on financing options.
Okay, so that's a nice case study and something of value that all of you together did. Are you able, your organization, to take that experience and replicate it, allow somebody else to replicate that experience? Is there a mechanism that your organization has for replicating processes in other places?
With respect to smart microgrid, and also the other area we've been doing pilot projects with is using recycled water for industrial purposes like cooling towers. We've been extracting some of those processes through case studies and through some tools on our EcoCloud website that help other institutions and companies go through a similar process. We have further to go. So we've had the head of operations for the university tell his story to our audiences about what he's doing on his campus so that other campuses, they might be a business park type campus or other universities can do the same thing. But to get to the point of being able to actually have the recipe that people would follow to replicate it, we're working on that. We're not all the way there, but that is our intention, and we do a lot of interconnecting of people so they can share, by publishing those case studies, so they can share knowledge with each other and help each other through the process.
Okay, I've been listening. I may go off on a tangent, but this is something I'd really like an answer to, and I want to get it in before we run out of time. You have at least a half dozen, I think, local governments. Cupertino, maybe San Jose.
We have about 30.
30 local governments are members. And every one of those local governments is required now to meet certain requirements of California's Climate Warming Solution Act, which is called AB 32.
Yes.
Is it easy for these?
Oh, piece of cake.
Oh, really?
No. Well, what we've been doing with them over the last several years is working with a couple of other a couple other institutions, ICLEI, which is a consulting organization, and the Joint Venture Silicon Valley Network. And we helped the cities figure out what their climate footprints were. And most of them found that 90% of their emissions came from outside their operations, their business, from the businesses and the transportation and the housing that they had. And we worked with them to help develop climate action plans. And then some of them are already implementing those plans, and we're helping them do that, and also creating a peer community of all the sustainability leaders from these different organizations to help each other out. So, for example, the city of South San Francisco just recently hired someone to fill that role, and she could come to our meeting and meet other people who are further along the journey, and they could help each other out.
Okay, so I see how your group has helped those 30. What is the biggest challenge all 30 of those local governments right now is facing with respect to complying with AB 32? And I know it's a little early in complying, but what's the challenge right this minute?
I think there are actually 3 challenges. One is that half the emissions in the Bay Area, more or less, come from transportation. And there is no unified transportation system in the Bay Area. There are many different transit agencies. There's one transit commission, but if you've ever tried to take the bus from Palo Alto to Menlo Park, it doesn't work.
So this is a regional planning.
There's a regional planning
management.
and management solution. And so it's very hard to get people out of their cars. Like in New York City, it's too expensive to own a car, much less drive from point A to point B. So you're going to walk or use public transit. Here we're spread out, we're organized around the car, and it's hard to get people out of their cars. So that's one.
What's the next one?
The next one is the built environment, which I know is an area of interest for you.
Oh, yes.
So there are things that the cities can do, especially because they control zoning, and the state has some ordinances that help raise the energy efficiency of the way buildings are built and landscaped, and also the water properties of those buildings as well. And so that is something, achieving those standards, training their inspectors and their people, making sure that contractors know what those are, and implementing that is another big area.
At a time when they have no money and they've already gutted their building development groups. It's
Yes,
difficult.
it is difficult, although they have some fees that they can use, and it's difficult, but it's necessary. And then the third area is that governments have tremendous purchasing power, even in bad times. If you add up the budgets for purchasing of the biggest counties, hospitals, and cities in this area, they're spending billions of dollars a year on buying all kinds of things. So one of the things our sustainability governmental folks did is they created a system for public environmentally preferred purchasing, so they could start to aggregate their demand and drive down the prices of environmentally preferred things like paint, machines, equipment, paper, all the kinds of things that they buy.
We don't have much time. Looking at a company like SAP, we're not going to be able to look too much, but they're a member of your organization in part because they're looking for ways to be part of this movement of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in their own environment.
Yes, they are.
And they're also looking to share their insights and their software with the other members and to understand the other members' needs.
The enterprises of many big companies are run on SAP, so they're trying to help make supply chains more green and help companies make their own operations more green.
You have a wonderful organization. There are many local governments and corporations still in the Valley that should be a member of your organization.
Absolutely.
What's your URL, or how do people reach you?
Well, they can go to www.sustainablesv, S for Silicon and V for Valley.org. And I think that there's the contact information, and if they want to send me email, they can do it at info@sustainablesv.org.
Okay. I want to say I like seeing nonprofits that have a mix of governments, academia, as well as business. And I find a lot of the nonprofits that are trying to help do not include the businesses as much as they want. Hi, I'm Michael Killen, and my guest has been Marianna Grossman. She is the head of an important organization that is helping Silicon Valley see some new great opportunities. It is Sustainable Silicon Valley. Thank you.